but there it is. You see, it's all clear. You were meant to be here from the beginning.
Look, we're not going to sell this to anybody. We're not going to try to do anything. Let's self-publish it like our underground inspirations before us. So we borrowed some money from my uncle, and we published in 1984 black and white version of the Turtles in an oversized comic, which was a mistake. It's a separate funny story. But we had enough money to print 3,000 copies, and even at that point we had no freaking clue of how to distribute it, what to do with it. But we, through Peter's influence, he said, well, let's send out a press release. So we'll send out this little press pack. We sent that to the sent out this press release to announce the Turtles were here. For who cares? And we put one ad in a magazine, a newspaper trade called the Comics Buyer's Guide. I don't know if many of you remember that. The older guys like me probably do. It was like a black and white newspaper that was all about comics and collecting and buying back issues and what was going on in the news. And just from that thing, we reached out to comic stores and comic artists and comics buyers all over the country. And we were intending to sell our books single copy, one at a time, $1.50 plus 50 cents postage, and that's where Little League started. And that's you know, I think, you know, again, our parents' surprise, our surprise. I mean, when we got the first 3,000 copies back in the printer in Dover, New Hampshire, and they unloaded them on our front doorstep, we actually made furniture out of them in the studio, like bookshelves and a coffee table and stuff, because we didn't think we'd ever sell them. And I think it took about 3 weeks, and we'd sold out of the first issue. It was a pretty amazing thing to us that it worked.
And the question I've always wondered, why turtles? What was it about turtles that really made you go, yeah, that's where my fortune is?
You know, it's funny, and it's a great question, because it is something that, you know, I think both Peter and I have asked ourselves the same question. It was sort of, you know, I look back to, I grew up in Maine, and my grandmother used to live on a lake, and there was this outlet where there's this kind of runoff from the lake, and there was all kinds of turtles, and I used to tease them when I was a kid, you know, snapping turtles, and you stick the stick in and they'd snap it off, and that kind of thing. And there's other sort of turtleisms along the way, but it just, I think it really came down to when we had this idea that we wanted to have these martial arts animals. What's the funniest animal character that would be like a Bruce Lee martial artist? And, you know, you still want it to move and be, you know, be able to do some of the moves, and, you know, slugs and fish and things like that just didn't work. So the turtle's the slowest animal on the planet, so to speak, as a very skilled martial artist seemed to be very funny. I mean, that was, you know, that was sort of, not to jump ahead, but that was kind of the absurdity when we had done this drawing, which, for those of you who probably know the story, I mean, as it goes, is that, you know, Peter and I had founded Mirage Studios in Dover, New Hampshire, and it was, Peter and his wife had rented this house, and they had a roommate that left, and they had a spare room. So Peter and I turned the living room into Mirage Studios, and it was a mirage because it was a living room. We didn't really have a studio. And one night in a sort of studio one-upmanship, and it was kind of, I always like to say that I used to think Peter watched the worst TV shows in the world. He loved the A-Team, he liked TJ Hooker, and he liked those. So I felt it was my job to annoy him as much as possible while he was watching his favorite shows. So one night while he was watching TJ Hooker, I did the sketch of a turtle standing upright, nunchucks strapped to his arms, and a mask on. And I had this little comic thing, and I said, Ninja Turtle, and I threw it on his desk, his chair, and he laughed out loud. He thought it was funny, and I said, this is the next big thing. So he, of course, had to top my drawing with a sketch of his own, and then I had to top his drawing, so I did a sketch of 4, each of them with different weapons, and I had the Ninja Turtle comic writing above their heads, and when I did it in pencil, and when he inked it in, he added Teenage Mutant to the title, and you know, we were laughing. We thought it was the funniest thing ever, and we get up, as I love to say, we get up the next day, and because we didn't have very much distracting paying work going on. We said, why don't we come up with a story that tells how these characters got to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that was November of 1983 when we started working on the comic.
And from issue 1 and the title alone, there's obviously a little bit of X-Men influence in there, and a lot of Daredevil. And I was just wondering over the years whether you ever talked to anybody from Marvel or any of the Daredevil or X-Men creators, and what they've had to say about that, if anything.
That's another good question, because it is sort of, we sort of waited for the lawsuit to come at any point. I never did, but I did have because for those of you who don't know, the specifics are, when we did the parody element, besides making the cover look like Frank Miller's Ronin, because I was a huge Frank Miller fan. In fact, Daredevil was one of my favorite characters. I had read it for a long time, and I was reading, Gene Colan and Bob Brown and all these guys were doing it. Even when Roger McKenzie was writing it and doing it in the 150s, and along comes this new kid around issue 158 named Frank Miller that started as a penciler, and sort of what he did to Daredevil. When we were sort of coming up again with the parody sort of homage origin, I said, well, in Daredevil, they never said what happened to the canister after young Matt Murdock rushed out in front of that truck that was barreling down on a blind man crossing the street, and this screeching brakes jarred this canister loose, and it struck him near the eyes. They never said what happened to the canister, so I said, that's where we told that whole story. Then we had the canister continue down the street, and just conveniently, this poor kid named Chet was standing near an open sewer hole holding a glass terrarium with turtles in it. And so it struck that and all into the sewer they went, next to a rat. And so when it continued when it came to time to name the turtle's father, Stick, who was Daredevil's kind of mentor, teacher, Stick, Splinter, and then Frank Miller had the Hand, this evil ninja gang called Hand. Well, that's where the foot came from, obviously, and many other things. But we sort of took bits of, that was the most specific thing. We took bits of, what Chris Claremont was doing with the X-Men and the New Mutants and all that stuff. But I had a meeting with Stan Lee once, within the last 24 months, and we were in his office because his representatives thought it would be really cool that Stan writes something for heavy metal. And so we were having a meeting talking about different ideas, and we got onto the Turtles, and I said, well, the Turtles' origin is really kind of Daredevil's origin. And before I even finished saying it, he blurted out, I almost sued the pants off you guys. Sort of like, I said, well, it wasn't anything directly, it was sort of derivative enough. He said, well, you young upstarts, I really didn't want to mess with you. This is the guy that's stolen more credit from the artist that did the real work.
Allegedly. Marvel's lawyers are in the building.
No, I have a lot of respect for Stan because he really was a pioneer. And the times, and I didn't mean to slam him, it was sort of, I don't want to make a joke at his expense, but back in those days it was work for hire. So when those guys worked for Marvel, it was work for hire, and they knew it. And I just wished later on in life that some of those guys got a little bit more credit. And I know Marvel and DC and a lot of places are making steps and amends to that, which is great. So.
From the beginning,
listen to your woman, but not closely.